Alright, so in this example, we are going to do the same kind of logic which we implied in the previous example, or in the example you're still going to see in Java. I don't know in which order the video clips will be shown, but what we basically have is we have an Access database called Happy Snappy over here, and the Access database contains various tables, and one of the tables is called customers. Alright, some of our customers here, with a customer number as a primary key and some other fields for the name, surname, some points each time they get orders developed, and a cell phone number. And the basic idea of the application is to provide database access to the table for modification. Alright, and then in that regard, if we're going to have a look and say, alright, the user must be able to scroll through and determine how many points, how many males there are that has a certain amount of points and how many females, and that's the general idea. Alright, so we're going to connect to a table within an Access database. Now really the Embarcadero VCL architecture makes it very easy to connect to any database, and it supplies us with two various types of connections. Firstly, it's direct connections, synchronous, asynchronous, or unidirectional and bidirectional connections, but that doesn't matter. But what it also provides us is to work with the data directly or via a query, and this makes it much powerful. That is really a very interesting feature that has been there since Delphi 1, where the data that's represented or fetched from a table is used as part of a data set, and a data set is an object. Very nice. Delphi is not the only programming language that incorporates a data set. The .NET architecture, which include Visual Studio and Visual Basic subsequently, and C# and so forth, also incorporates a data set, but the data set there is a little bit different, where a data set in the .NET environment may entail the use of more than one table, but in Delphi explicitly it's one specific table, and I could use a data collection or a data client data set for more than one table if I want to work in that way. But for our case, we just need to connect to the database, therefore we place on an ADO connection, and we can build up a connection string. You'll see there's no current connection string connected, and I could select my database going this way by selecting it and selecting the path. But I'm not going to do it this way. We can do it this way, and there's nothing wrong with it. But the CAPS document states that you should know a little bit about the connection string, just the idea. So we've written the code for that. We will have a look at it just now. Then we have a data source. We have an ADO table and an ADO query. Now an ADO table basically fetches the data from the specified table, and the data source then binds our data aware controls to the table or the query. Alright, so in this example, it's a little bit more than the one I've done in Java or the one that you're going to see. We can either going to work from the table or the queries, the result set directly. It's irrespective, and that's very nice. The data set shares the same methods, and that makes it very powerful and very nice. You'll see the unknown fields there indicating that that hasn't been set, so it's going to be set in code. As well, we also included our own abstract data type or our own class, our telephone validation class. There we go. If we can just open it, class cell phone. Very interesting. Delphi uses the black box concept when it comes to the definition and implementation of the class definition. What do we mean by that? That this interface of the class and the implementation is separated, and there's very good sound reasons for that. But just for interest's sake, our T cell phone class there, we have one cell phone number, private attribute. We've got the constructor create, the get provider, which will return the cell phone. The same is valid, which is going to do certain validation operation on my cell phone number and then return to me whether the cell phone matches the validation. A set method there, which passes the number, and a get phone number. Alright, so the provider returns for me if it's MTN, Vodacom, or so forth. In the implementation, the constructor just initializes it all zeros. The get returns the current cell phone, and over here it's a nice case statement, very powerful, very nicely in Delphi. Case 38 will result in MTN, 8272 will result in Vodacom, and otherwise the result is unknown. And this is the good thing of the Pascal language. It's really readable, and it was developed specifically with having teaching programming in mind. Is valid again is our boolean, and I'm not going to explain the process, just to explain how the various logic could be implied when we use a little part of logic. So whenever we use methods, sometimes we'd like to include some logic, and this has been missing in the previous types of papers, where there was a big focus on just a type of recipe things. Here I've included something completely different, which modifies and validates a specific cell phone number for validity based on a certain algorithm that I have displayed over here. This programs will be available so you can examine it. It's almost just an algorithm, alright? And then set cell phone number. Again, it's a mutator method where we get the passing parameter and we assign it to the private attribute. Wonderful. So this is our class, and in order to use that class in our application, we've set it as a Pascal unit. The only thing that we need to do is to just include that class of ours, and our class will be included somewhere over here. There we go, cell phone unit. So now this unit can recognize it. Good. This is the form class again, and as part of the form class I've declared some public attributes, and this is nice. Now the learners will know that I male points and I female is part of the form class. So all the methods and all the events that I tie to this form class will be able to access it. And over here I've got my check phone reference to a T cell phone object. Very nice. Alright. Wonderful. Now let's have a look at the Delphi code for connection. And that will be doing on the form show event when the form is shown. I also could have done it on the off form create if I wanted to. I like to do it on form show. It's just a personal preference. There is a big difference between the two events, but form show is a good one to place it in normally. And then I say ADO connection 1 connection string, and I provide my connection string. Now, very important, the idea behind the CAPS document is not to let the learners understand what this whole connection string means. The big idea is to tell them that my data resides somewhere at an external source. That's what's the idea about. If you can set it manually or using a wizard, it really doesn't matter. It's just that I have the theoretical knowledge to state that the connection string is the way that we connect to the data. Login prompt in Delphi, we set false. We don't want to log into the data. By default, it will require us to provide a password. We're not. And then I've got my table and my query component. This is a little bit different than the other example. I can decide if I want to work with the table data directly or via a query, and this is very, very powerful. The only thing I do is I just assign the connection to which it knows where to connect to. In many instances, you won't just have one query and one table in your application, but you will rather have more than one table. As we have in our customers database over here, we could imply to have 4 tables, and the nice thing is all those 4 tables then will just point to the same connection. Alright, and now I say ADO table name equals customers. I set the data source data set. Very important, this data set is now going to be populated automatically with all the data from the table. I supply my DB grid with a data source, very easy, and then the navigator of a data source as well, and I open the table. Alright, so if the form then starts, by default, if we run the application, the table will be opened. The item index of the radio group, which is this, will be set to table by default. Alright, and the query, if we wanted to go the query route, is being set to that. But let me just comment out this code, and then we'll see what's going to happen when the program runs the first time. So if it runs the first time, and on the form show event, when the form is shown, magically all our data is displayed. The DB grid took care of our headings. There's no irrespective difficulty of displaying which headings must go where. It fetched it up automatically, and there it's registered. Alright, and very nice, we've got our current record pointer, and this is a wonderful feature that I love, because now we can navigate through the data. It doesn't highlight it like in another example that I did, but the current record is always indicated. Alright, and that is wonderful. We could write code to highlight it, but it's not necessary. The current record here is displayed for us. Alright, and I can navigate through it because the data source of this navigator was set to it. I could also write the code for the navigator, and I will do that just now. Alright, so we could also decide then in the example that no, if we don't want to work via the data or via the table with the data set, we could also use implement a query. So what we do now is that if I select then query over here, a query is executed and the same data is displayed and returned fast. Let's just have a look at the code. We're closing a query, we're adding an SQL string, very easy. Select everything from customers, all the fields and all the records. Open the query, and that opens the query for me instantaneously, and my DB grid is automatically managed. I can go, for instance, and if we have a look, if the data source, now this is where the little query has been written, if my item index of my radio group, if it's 0, then it's from the table, or 1, it's from the query. And what does it mean? If the item index is set to that, then the data set of the data source is ADO table 1. Very, very easy. And otherwise, the data set is the query. So that makes it really very, very easy to manipulate. So I can decide, and automatically, because the data source is tied to the DB grid, the inherent data is automatically displayed. This is a very, very powerful feature of the Embarcadero SEO suite. The same applies for the data grid view in the .NET environment. It's also a nice component which applies its own column headers and so forth. So good, let's have a look at the coding, because we're almost gone through the program. If we run through and now say, alright, let's say we would like to obtain and determine how many males and females have more than 2,000 points. Now let's say this was an old type of text file. Then we will read the data from the first record, determine the customer points, determine whether it's more than 2,000, go to the next record. So all this nice iterative logic can now be applied. And that is what makes Delphi powerful. It's going to, this query is going to, if you do it from the table, this query, it's not a query, is going to be visually shown to the kids. And this really, really enforces cognitively and helps them to expand. And I know the idea of a loop. Iterating through a set. It could be the same type of technique here will be used, for instance, when we search for the highest value, for instance, in an array. Go to the first record, define, do some checking, go to the next record, and do that until we've reached the size of the array or the end of the table in this account. So let's have a look with it via a table. If I do it via a table, there you will see the animation. It will go through, and now it's visually to the learners where they can see, alright, I'm iterating through, and then I've got a nice message displayed stating the number of males with more than 2,000 points is that, and the number of females with more than 2,000 points is 186. Let us have a look at the code here. It's already done also in a case statement, depending on an if statement. I don't know how I've done it previously. If it's a table, it will be different than it's with a query, just to illustrate how different it works. Alright, so let's just have a look. If the item index is 0, that means it's a table, and this is the logic that we said. We would like to say ADO table 1 dot first, go to the first record. While it's not the end of the file, that means while that record pointer is not at the end. And then I just go and I want to access my individual fields. See how easy. If ADO table 1, field by name, if the customer title, if the value is Mr., that means it's a male, and the value of the points is more than 2,000, I would like to increment my form class variable I male points counter. Just add 1. Otherwise, if it's Mrs. and it's more than 2,000, I do the same for the females. And in my loop, go to the next. I placed in a little sleep over here because the process goes very fast, but this sleep then just pauses it a little bit to illustrate for this video recording purposes how the record pointer goes down to the end. And this is the whole type of logic. And I think this type of logic, if we teach the kids start from the first record, is applicable in so many instances today in problem solving, generic problem solving, where we iterate through a list and to find some values to do some comparison. I think this is wonderful. Alright, and the nice thing about that, something that I enjoy and something that I'm very proud supporter of, is the way that they could see it visually. It's visually seen, and something that you can explain via something that's visual. I think I can't even state the value that it has for learning purposes. Alright, and here's just my show message where I enter strings, so I also call some built-in functions there to invoke it. Otherwise, if I wanted to do it with a query, I could also do it with a query, the same data set, and you could see that when I run my application, the compiler doesn't matter if I switch between the few. Over there it displayed my data, my record set from, very important, some of my query. And what was nice over here, there it displays my data, but the nice thing is my DB grid automatically adapted to the columns and the rows that I specified for my query without any problem. That's wonderful. So if I go back to table again, zoop, automatically it moves. Alright, this is just by changing there. This code is very nice. So if we have a look just at, if we select a query, we close a query, we add a nice query statement to it, we clear it,